Hi, I'm Kate Lamada, an executive functioning coach and learning specialist. I teach parents how to identify the executive functioning skills behind their child's struggle and use practical strategies that build confidence, reduce conflict, and create greater independence at home and at school. So, it's 7:30 at night. Homework hasn't started. You've said something 3 times already, maybe 4. You've done the calm reminder. You've done the less calm reminder. You've left the room, come back, and found the exact same scene you left. And then your child, the one you've been trying to get to the desk for the last 45 minutes, looks up and says completely clearly, I know, I have to write the intro paragraph for the history essay, cite 2 sources, and format the bibliography. I'll start in a minute. This is the moment that makes parents feel like they're going quietly out of their minds because you can't argue with someone who already knows. You can't walk them through the steps when they can already walk you through the steps. You can't explain what's expected when they can already explain it back to you, sometimes with more detail than you actually remembered. So you stand there and you think, if they know, why don't they just do it? That question right there is the one I want to answer today, because the answer isn't what most parents expect. And getting it wrong is exactly what keeps the cycle going for years. Most parents end up in one of 2 places with this. Either the child is being willfully difficult, attitude, stubbornness, choosing not to cooperate, or the child just isn't motivated enough. And if you could finally find out the right consequence, the right reward, the right thing that actually matters to them, something would click. I understand why both of those explanations make sense. When a child knows what to do and isn't doing it, looking for motivation or attitude is a completely reasonable response to what you're seeing. The behavior on the surface doesn't give much else to work with. But neither of those explanations is what's actually happening. And I want to offer you a different one entirely. Here's the primary question I want you to hold through this whole video. If your child genuinely knows what to do, what is actually preventing them from starting? Not what it looks like from where you're standing, what is actually happening underneath the behavior in that moment. Here's the answer. It's a specific executive functioning skill called task initiation. And once you understand what it is and what it looks like inside the ADHD brain, the 7:30 couch scene makes complete logical sense. Task initiation is the brain's ability to begin a task without an external prompt. Think of it as an internal starting mechanism. When it's working reliably, a person has a thought about what needs to happen, and the brain converts that thought into action. The knowing connects to the doing. The gap between I understand what's required and I am now doing it is nearly invisible. When task initiation is a lagging skill, that conversion is genuinely unreliable. The thought is present. Your child can describe the assignment in full detail, but the bridge from I know what to do to I am now doing it doesn't fire on its own. The car has gas, the destination is completely clear, the engine just won't turn over without someone pressing start from the outside. When you watch a child who knows what to do and still isn't doing it, it looks exactly like a choice. It looks like resistance. It looks like they are deciding not to start. From the outside, there is almost no visible difference between a child who won't start and a child whose brain generally hasn't fired the internal start signal yet. But underneath the behavior, those are completely different things. One is a decision, the other is a skill gap. And the way you respond to those 2 things should look completely different. This is the second thing I want you to hold. Task initiation is an executive functioning skill, not a personality trait, not a character choice. not a measure of how much your child cares about the future. And here's why that distinction matters so much. Skills and choices respond to different kinds of support. If the problem is a choice, consequences and incentives make complete sense. You're trying to shift what the child decides. But if the problem is a skill gap, consequences and incentives don't reach the actual issue. They can create a temporary pressure that forces the behavior, but they don't build the skill. The next night, the gap is still there. This is exactly why the reward chart works for about 3 weeks, then falls apart. The novelty of a new system creates a little activation energy. The process is briefly interesting, and then the novelty fades, the system becomes routine, and you're back to 7:30 on the couch. This is why the conversation about effort and responsibility goes nowhere. Your child sits with you, hears everything you're saying, agrees, means it. And the next evening, it's the same because the conversation didn't address the skill that wasn't there. You can't motivate your way through a skill gap. You can't conversation your way through it either. One of the phrases I come back to constantly when I'm working with families is this: not won't, can't yet. Your child isn't choosing not to start. Their brain doesn't have a reliable, consistent internal trigger for starting yet. That's a completely different problem, and it requires a completely different response. I want to say something that a lot of parents generally need to hear. Task initiation is one of the most commonly affected executive functions in ADHD. This is not a character flaw in your child. It's not a parenting failure. It's not because they don't care about their grades or the future. The ADHD brain has a genuinely different relationship with self-activation, especially when the task ahead doesn't produce immediate interest or stimulation. Think about what you probably see when your child isn't struggling to start something. They can get into a video game within seconds. They can pick up the phone and start conversation before you've finished wondering whether they should. They can spend an hour on something that genuinely captures their attention without a single reminder from anyone. That's not inconsistency. That's not choosing when to put in effort based on what they feel like doing. That's the ADHD brain showing you exactly what it looks like when the task itself is generating an activation signal. When interest and stimulation are high, the internal starter fires on its own. When the task requires generating that signal from nothing, the starter fails. Homework almost never creates its own activation signal. The reward for finishing it is hours away. The consequence for skipping it might be days away. For a brain that runs most effectively on immediacy, that combination makes starting genuinely hard. Not hard in the need to push through discomfort way. Hard in the activation system isn't receiving the signal it needs to fire way. Knowing every reason they should start isn't enough to fire the system. Your child can understand all of the stakes and still sit on the couch, because knowing and starting are governed by different brain functions entirely. When you remind your child 3 times and they finally sit down, you haven't fixed the problem. You've been the external trigger. You've provided the activation signal that their brain wasn't generating on its own. That helped them get started that evening. It did almost nothing to build the skill for the next evening. This isn't a criticism of reminding. Every parent does it. It keeps the night functional. And I'm naming it because understanding what actually is happening inside the dynamic is the first step towards doing something that actually changes the pattern over time. When you're the external trigger every single evening, things get done. But the internal starter motor doesn't get any stronger. Doesn't have to. It doesn't get practiced. It just gets replaced night after night. And that's the part that quietly costs something. Not loudly, Not all at once, but over months and years, a child whose initiation skills goes unbuilt will need more support, not less, as demands around them increase. Middle school gets harder. High school gets harder. The couch scene doesn't resolve on its own. It just follows them to a different room. Which brings me to the question I want to leave you with. Once you understand that task initiation is the lagging skill, what does it actually look like to support it in a way that builds it instead of just substituting it for every single night? That's a question with a real answer. There are practical ways to scaffold the activation process that get lighter over time, where you gradually shift from being the external trigger to being more of a coach and eventually not being needed for this piece at all. That's not wishful thinking. That's what happens when the support you're providing is matched the actual skill that's lagging. If this landed for you and you're ready to go deeper, I'd love to have you at my upcoming workshop. It's called From Shutdown to Follow Through: How to Help ADHD Kids Start and Finish What They Start. And it's built for parents who want to understand the full executive functioning picture behind their child's struggles and lead with a real framework for responding in a way that builds independence, not more dependence. The link to register is in the description. And if this is your first time on this channel, I encourage you to watch the next video, because there's a belief that the most well-intentioned, hardworking parents hold about what good support looks like, and it's quietly making the whole cycle harder to break. That one's coming up next.